Right, welcome to Anatomy and Physiology Lesson 7.01. This is the first video in the packet on muscle physiology. So in this chapter, we're going to look at the arrangement of muscle cells. They're very specialized, they're very unique, and we're going to look at the physiology of how these contract, which is known as the sliding filament theory. So let's start off with a little bit of review. You'll notice it talks about skeletal muscles here. If we compare these to cardiac and smooth, we'll just kind of do a recap of what we learned about cardiac muscle and smooth. So skeletal muscle, and we'll put skeletal over here, is striated, as is cardiac. Cardiac was striated too, but smooth was non-striated. Yes. Skeletal was voluntary. But cardiac and smooth are involuntary. And we're going to look a little bit also in this chapter on how our nerves, let me write that out, how our nerves control the muscles. The thing is, every skeletal cell, muscle fiber cell, has multiple nuclei. So we call that multinucleated. This is multi as well, but smooth is a single nucleus. Well, what we're going to focus on in this chapter is skeletals. So we're going to really talk about cardiac or smooth. And instead of writing all of these out, I gave you a preloaded set, which is a little bit different. But to start off with, your muscles make up 40 to 50% of your total body weight. And you have over 400. Actually, some estimates give you 600 to 800. So if you like go onto Wikipedia, why is there so much variety? Scientists don't always agree on what constitutes a single muscle. We're going to talk about kind of the general characteristics of a muscle group. And most of you probably know that, when we talk about muscles, we're talking about movement. But they also allow us to do other things like to maintain our posture, so to allow us to stand upright. So we're using those muscles, even if we're not moving, it holds us in place. Support soft tissues. So in the gut, in your abdominal area, you have a lot of important organs in there. You've got your intestines, you've got your stomach. The bottom part of the liver is in the abdominal cavity, and the only thing in between you and the outside environment are your abdominal muscles. So an example here would be your abdominal muscles. Your abdominal muscles that support and protect. So you could say both. Guarding your body openings. This is a special group of muscles called sphincters. You notice it says exit, entrance, and exit. S-P-H-I-N-C-T-E-R-S. Sphincters are circular in nature, so they have this shape, and they could open and close. So you technically have 3 muscles on your face that are sphincters that control the opening for your mouth and each of your eyes. Your rectum has 2 sphincters. One is voluntary and one is involuntary. You have 2 sphincters, one at the opening of your stomach and one at the end of your stomach. And these are really important because they control what allows, what goes in, what goes out, what stays in, and what doesn't go out. So, sphincters and their ring shape. Maintaining your body temperature. That's not one that people usually think about, but our body temperature is the result of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration, which is the burning of glucose and our ATP to produce, the burning of glucose in our mitochondria to produce ATP. And one of the side effects is heat. And this takes place in our muscles, and specifically in our skeletal muscles. So keeping our body temperature is an important part of your muscles. And then storing your nutrient reserves. Well, what's the main nutrient that we have in muscles? Well, by themselves, they're made of protein. Let's see, I'm going to go to orange. So the first thing that we have in muscles are proteins. That's what they're made of. And if you stop eating, anorexics will start to digest their own muscles, and they'll use it for food. So your body can actually cannibalize its own muscle, and that's okay if it's your bicep. But remember, your heart is a muscle too, and so if you are consuming muscle for your energy, that can get to be very problematic very quickly. We've got actually lots of glucose in the form of glycogen. In the muscles. Because we need muscle ATP for movement, we keep stores of glucose handy. We have all those mitochondria and they can grab that glucose. So those are just a couple of examples of some of the nutrient reserves we have in our muscles. So they do actually a lot more than move us around when we stop and we think about it. Okay, I'm going to pause the video while I swap my sheet out, because the next thing that we're going to talk about is arrangement. It's going to take a while to talk about the arrangement of muscles. In all of the other biology chapters you've had, you name it, if you look at a cell, it usually looks like this, and it's got a nucleus, and we've got a nucleolus, and we might have some organelles like a mitochondria or some, endoplasmic reticulum moving around there. We've got some Golgi bodies. So this is what you guys, and that's a really badly drawn cell, but that's what you have thought of as a cell. And what we're going to see is that muscle cells, very, very different structure. And we're just going to spend some time talking about how they're arranged in the anatomy. Okay, so I'm going to pause while I swap, and there might be a bit of a gap here. My computer's lagging pretty hard today. So hitting the pause button, but nothing. Okay, we're back. That took a while. Yeah, the lag is just horrible today. All right, what we have here is we're looking at, we're starting off on one end with an entire muscle. So this could be your bicep, and this is a skeletal muscle. It could be your bicep, it could be your tricep, it could be your hamstring, a quad, you name it. And then we're going down to the smallest part of that. And you guys have all eaten chicken. So you know when you pull chicken apart, it pulls apart in these long pieces or fibers. And right here in the middle, we have, it says muscle cell. So we're looking at the center, and muscle fiber. These two terms are synonyms. Instead of calling a muscle cell, it's often called a muscle fiber. So muscle fiber whoops, I'm off screen. Muscle fiber is a muscle cell. And we've already said that can have a lot of nuclei. It can also be really, really long. So we could be several inches to even a foot in length. Several, abbreviated. Several inches to feet. That's a symbol for inches in case you didn't know. But what we would see is we can take that muscle cell and we can break that down into fibers, and we can break those fibers down. If I take a bunch of muscle fibers and group them together, I get a large type of fiber. So what we're going to do is we're going to start here at this end, and we're going to work our way down. So this muscle, again, bicep, tricep, and we get into our cats when we start to pull apart a muscle. You're going to see there's a membrane. I'm going to do this in pink. There's a membrane that wraps all the way around a muscle. And this membrane is called the, another thing you need to know, myo is one of our Latin terms for muscle. So because this lies upon the muscle, this membrane is called the epimysium. Epi, upon, and myo for muscle. So membrane that lies on the muscle. And it wraps around the entire muscle. It acts like if you've ever, like if you imagine if you took a handful of pens and you wrapped them in saran wrap, that's what it would be like. If I go into the muscle and I pull apart, I would find sections. Muscles are made up of sections. So here they pulled out one section and they blew it up down here. So they took this section and they magnified it. So a fascicle is one section of a muscle. A fascicle is one section of a muscle. And that's wrapped in a membrane too. So you're going to see fibers and wrapped by membrane, fiber wrapped by membrane. And my lighter colors aren't showing up, so I'm going to do this in brown. If you want to, you could color the whole thing in. The membrane that wraps a fascicle is called the perimysium. Perimysium. That's a membrane that wraps a fascicle. The epimysium is a membrane that wraps a muscle. So let's put that definition up there. Membrane that wraps a muscle. Well, a fascicle is actually just a bunch of muscle cells or muscle fibers. And for a long time, I'm going to say muscle cell or muscle fiber to get you used to the fact that they're synonyms. So they pulled out one section of that fascicle and they magnified it. And we see that that is a muscle cell or a muscle fiber. Well, guess what? There's a membrane that wraps our muscle cells too. So every muscle cell in your body has a membrane that wraps it. And it's called the endomysium, endomysium. And the endomysium is a membrane that wraps a muscle cell or muscle fiber. Membrane that wraps a muscle cell or a muscle fiber. And they kind of have it cut and pulled away here. When we get into the anatomy of a muscle cell, we're going to see that the muscle cells are made of more fibers called myofibrils. It's a little hard to read. They do not have a wrapping. And then those myofibrils are made of myofilaments, and we have two. The thin ones are called actin, and I always remember that because it sounds like actin. And the thicker ones are called myosin. So actin and myosin. Well, what's the point to all of this? If you've ever looked at how they build the Brooklyn Bridge or any kind of a suspension bridge, this is exactly what they do. They take a bundle of steel cable and they wrap it. They put like a membrane around it, and then they'll take those bundles and they'll wrap those. So long before we were using this, we were building our suspension bridges this way. Nature had a way of understanding that this creates a lot of strength. And by the way, we are all protein. So this is all protein. They're fibrous proteins, like big long fibers of proteins. Down here, I have the same thing. So here I have a myofibril pointing to this one little piece. This is a muscle fiber. Well, what's going to be wrapping? Let's do a takeaway here. How well do you remember? So here's my muscle fiber, and this is pointing to it. So I have a membrane around this muscle fiber. What's this membrane going to be? It's going to be my endomysium. So there's a membrane around this, and I'm going to do the same color. That's the endomysium. Okay, so I have one muscle fiber. That means that this is going to be a fascicle. So this structure here is going to be a fascicle. Fascicle. So what is wrapping that? It's going to be the paramecium. So here, kind of down in through here, I've got the paramecium in brown. All right, so this particular muscle is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fascicles. So I have this outer sheath. Well, what do we call the one that wraps the entire muscle? That's going to be the epimecium, my epimecium in pink. Notice back here, I'm showing it comes down into a connecting point. There's going to be a bone here, some kind. And for review, don't forget that a tendon connects the muscle to the bone. All right, so what are our, muscle to bone. What are our takeaways? We talked about the overall function of muscles and the fact they do more than just move us. They help us stand up. They protect organs. We have sphincters that control opening and closing of body openings. They maintain our body temp. We have nutrient reserves. And as we begin to understand, and we're going to spend some detailed time looking at the anatomy of the muscle cell, we have to know that these fibers are groups within groups within groups. And we start out with this large muscle group wrapped by an epimecium. One piece of that's a fascicle. Each fascicle is wrapped by a paramecium. One piece of that's a muscle fiber. Each muscle fiber is wrapped by an endomysium. Then we go down to myofibril and myofilaments. All right, so that's all for now, and we've got this chapter started. I'll see you in the next video.